Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Page in America, where we explore the power, profit, and politics shaping American healthcare and what you can do about it. I'm your host, Miles Baker, along with Dr. Rob Davidson. Dr. Rob, how are you doing this afternoon?
Well, as good as can be expected in the times that we are in. How are you doing today?
I'm pretty good. Good. We got it's a balmy warm day in Chicago, and it seems like we've gotten some okay news in the press today. So
Right.
yeah. So why don't we jump right into it? Today we've got a great show for you today. We're going to talk a little bit about the pushback that Republicans are getting on Medicaid cuts. We're going to chat about the Affordable Care Act being back at the Supreme Court. We're going to wrap up with a conversation about what's going on at HHS with Robert Kennedy Jr. So let's kick it off, because I think this is some of the best news that we could kick it off with. Is vulnerable Republicans made a statement trying to appear in support of Medicaid. We'll see if that's actually what they're doing, but it does look like Republicans in purple districts are getting cold feet about gutting Medicaid. The Hill reports that a group of them sent a letter to House Speaker Mike Johnson declaring that they will not support a final reconciliation bill that includes any reduction in Medicaid coverage for vulnerable populations. Vulnerable and moderate House Republicans are warning House GOP leaders that they will not support one big, beautiful bill encompassing President Trump's legislative agenda if it includes cuts to Medicaid. Over 12 House Republicans exactly in competitive districts sent that letter to Speaker Mike Johnson and House Majority Leader Steve Scalise, House Majority Whip Tom Emmer. What do you make of this, Rob? This is, we talked a little bit about this on the last show, but this seems like, is this the signal or is this a bunch of noise? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it feels like a bunch of noise. It feels like vulnerable Republicans are probably worried about vulnerable Republicans more than they are about vulnerable individuals, because then it begs a question, like who defines who is vulnerable, right? Anybody who qualifies for Medicaid by definition is vulnerable. At the highest end of income in the expanded Medicaid universe, that's like 138% of the poverty level. I mean, that's not a lot of money. Folks can't afford, housing. They can't afford food. They certainly can't afford cancer treatment. They certainly can't afford a surprise surgery. So it just begs the question, how are you all going to define vulnerable? In my take as a doc for 25 years, everybody's vulnerable, right? Because it doesn't matter, from the CEO down to the person, the homeless person who comes in, everybody can get appendicitis, right? Everybody can get cancer. And so you take these folks that qualify based on their income, but they're just going to decide, well, they're not a group that I deem vulnerable. I don't know what that means. And I'm afraid with these guys, that what they think it means is different than what most of us think it means. What do you think? I mean, from a political standpoint, seems like the pressure's getting to them, right?
I think the pressure might be getting to them. Look, do I think some of those Republicans among that 12, if they thought they could politically get away with cutting Medicaid, would they do it in a second? Absolutely. Are some of them still mad that Obamacare is the law of the land and they would like to claw back any little bit of that they can? Yes, 100%. Do I think some of them are genuinely worried that they are in districts, maybe they're 50-50 districts, maybe they're R+1 districts, that they are genuinely worried if they take a bad vote on gutting Medicaid, that will adversely affect their reelection chances? You bet. I think it would adversely affect their reelection chances. I think just the conversation to date is going to adversely affect their reelection chances, because Medicaid is such a potent political issue. It is so broadly popular among Democrats, among independents, even among Republicans, that going and monkeying around with Medicaid, with such high percentages of most congressional districts actually being on Medicaid and relying on Medicaid, almost everyone knowing someone on Medicaid, that if they go clawing back essential services, I think that you could see real backlash. And honestly, I think just that they've put it on the table so forcefully, they're already experiencing a lot of pushback. And so seems like the pushback's working.
It is. And it's not just pushback for the sake of politics, right? To threaten Republicans. I think what they're seeing, and we see doctors stepping up, we see patients and patient advocates stepping up in these districts, because let's be frank, we should be talking about this everywhere, right? But the goal is to not have them vote to cut Medicaid. And what that requires is a handful of Republicans, right? Assuming all the Democrats don't vote to cut Medicaid in the House. And then, in the Senate, it's a handful of Republicans in each chamber, or in one chamber or the other, that, decides I'm not going to vote for this god-awful bill to provide tax cuts for billionaires. And so the pushback isn't just, well, this is political, we're trying to win a political fight. The pushback is people telling real stories, right? Real stories of healthcare, real stories of how Medicaid supports communities, and not just individuals, but entire communities. I talked about a little bit before. I've talked about it on other folks' podcasts. Medicaid is essential for hospitals to function. And hospitals, particularly in rural areas, I work in rural West Michigan. We have a single hospital that serves, our county of 30,000 people and the surrounding areas. And without that hospital, every single person in that community suffers. It isn't just people on Medicaid. If that hospital goes away, the people on work insurance, the people on Medicare, all of them have to find somewhere else to go. They got to drive, over an hour when they're having a heart attack, stroke, trauma, and they have that delayed care. It's gonna, people are gonna die, not just people on Medicaid. And so I think telling those stories, maybe reminding them of this, right? Maybe some of these, most members of Congress aren't physicians, aren't people who have ever worked in healthcare. And so we can't expect that they actually understand this. Most of them get their talking points from Mike Johnson or their leadership on how to talk about these issues, it would appear, because they all seem to be talking about it in a very similar way. And so maybe just reminding them, like, hey man, like, yes, this is bad for you politically, but look what this can do to these communities in your district. Right. Maybe we give them the benefit of the doubt that some of them get cold feet because they look and say, that really could be bad. No one ever told me that before. So I think just keep up the pressure. That's the silver lining. It's working.
One of the stories out of Minnesota that I found so fascinating. It almost seems like the further you are, if you're a Republican, the further you are away from Washington, D.C., the more you are grappling with the reality of what would happen if you were to pull that much funding out of the healthcare systems. What would happen specifically to hospitals? There was a letter sent by every Republican state senator in Minnesota, so not congressmen, but state senators, to the White House asking them not to cut Medicaid, because you're looking at like rural hospital deserts. The other very state specific story, I like how the sort of state specific dynamics are affecting the Medicaid cut. Former Missouri Attorney General and current U.S. Senator Josh Hawley is another one of the Republicans who basically said like no cuts to Medicaid. In 2018 as AG, he signed on to multi-state litigation seeking to overturn the ACA with its Medicaid expansion components, but he's had a big change of heart. You dig in sort of like, why is Josh Hawley being this sort of sole Republican senator who's being pretty vocal about Medicaid? It's because folks put Medicaid expansion into the Missouri state constitution. And so whether those federal funds show up or not, Medicaid is expanded in Missouri. And so not only would you see, like, you always have like the opposite effect of like, if they took the federal funding away, Missouri would have to still fulfill its Medicaid obligations, which mean there might not be any money left for roads or schools. You'd have this really like catastrophic event take place in Missouri. So I suspect even though Josh Hawley probably like as like a personal principle, I'm not sure how Josh Hawley feels about, universal health care. I suspect he doesn't feel great about it. But it would be such a bad event for the state of Missouri that he's actually against any Medicaid cuts. So.
Hey, good on the people of Missouri, right? Like when
Missouri, that's right.
When state legislatures and governors and states wouldn't do the right thing, people in Missouri enshrined abortion rights in their constitution. I know at the Committee to Protect Healthcare, we were helpful in doing that. Like, good on them, right? That's a mechanism they had. The people actually may be decisive. Now, that's one senator, right? We need 3 more. I don't know who the other 3 are. Maybe Murkowski, maybe Collins. I don't know. I think Collins said she was concerned about it. So I think that's as much as we're going to get from Senator Collins on anything until a vote is taken. Yeah. So, it's hopeful. The thing that worries me is this seems to be from the White House and from Johnson. Johnson said there will be cuts, right? These 12 senators, not vulnerable populations. Like, it's concerning. And now just yesterday, I think it was yesterday, Dr. Oz was sworn in as CMS administrator, like in charge of Medicaid and Medicare. healthcare. And, he said that we're going to modernize Medicare and Medicaid, right? And we're going to get rid of waste, fraud, and abuse in government insurance programs. And so, like, to me, what does modernize mean, right? I mean, I think you remember I had a conversation with then Vice President Mike Pence about a scheme to have block grants for Medicaid 5 years ago. And the word he used was, well, we're going to innovate. This is an innovation for Medicaid.
Yeah.
It's like, well, your innovation is my patient's loss of healthcare, my community's loss of a hospital. So what does modernize mean to Dr. Oz, right? We know he did some kooky things as a TV personality and promoting kooky therapies, but now he's actually in charge of this big, massive program that impacts hundreds of millions of people, Medicare and Medicaid. What does modernize mean to him? They're not telling us everything yet. I guess we'll have to wait. I think Medicaid's going to be an issue we're going to talk about on a lot of these episodes for the foreseeable future, right? I don't think this is going away in any way, shape, or form for a little while.
That's right. We are just at the very beginning of Hot Medicaid summer.
There you go.
But come back right here. We're going to have more action items on how to step up and be part of the people across the country that are working hard to defend Medicaid, a critical lifeline for so many folks across the country. So why don't we move on? Sort of on the other side of the coin, the Affordable Care Act is back before the Supreme Court. In Kennedy versus Braidwood Management, plaintiffs are arguing that the ACA requirements that insurance cover preventive care for free is unconstitutional. The Washington Post reports the plaintiffs sued over the preventative care provision because they objected to being forced to offer pre-exposure medications intended to prevent the spread of HIV among at-risk populations. The plaintiffs contend that the medications encourage and facilitate homosexual behavior, which they say conflicts with their religious beliefs. Ironically, Trump is defending Obamacare at the Supreme Court after, attacking it for so many years. The Supreme Court seems likely to uphold the ACA preventative services mandate. That's court watchers are saying that it seems like they'll uphold the preventative services mandate because Justices Kavanaugh and Coney Barrett seem particularly skeptical of the company's arguments, not paragons of liberalism.
Yeah.
Kavanaugh and Coney Barrett. But what's your take? I mean, a lot of the headlines on this made it seem like we could all rest easy. That wasn't exactly my take. What was yours, Rob?
Yeah, I mean, certainly I think upholding the ability for people to have preventative services without cost sharing, that's the really big important piece, without cost sharing. So, you can mandate that something's covered, but we know how insurance works these days, right? With massive deductibles, massive copays. So when there's no cost sharing, that is just covered. You don't have to pay anything up front. The thing that worries me a little bit is the U.S. Solicitor General in briefs filed with the court has argued, because part of the argument on Braidwood, getting into legalese a little bit. I'm not a lawyer. I never went to law school. But they're basically saying, well, the U.S. Preventative Services Task Force, they're the ones who make these recommendations on what should be covered. They have not been empowered by the president, have not been appointed, have not been, voted on by the Senate. And so they don't have any ability to actually make these. And what the U.S. Solicitor General is saying, well, actually, they're under the Secretary of HHS. So it's really the HHS Secretary that is empowered to decide what preventative services or, what mandatory services are covered. And what I'm worried about is one of the second one listed on the U.S. Preventative Services Task Force website is routine immunization. So currently routine immunizations are covered without cost sharing. That's critical because that allows everybody to have access. If you have insurance, everybody has access. And so now we have RFK Jr., noted anti-vax conspiracy theorist, running the show. If he's the guy empowered to say, and also now helping to fund an anti-vaxxer to research the causes of autism, a guy whose father now deceased, and he set up a fake study when I believe they were in Maryland, and the dad had lost his license. This individual was charged with practicing medicine without a license. They set up a fake institutional review board to allow them to do chelation, weird treatments to get rid of mercury in kids with autism. Chelation, that's the thing you give drugs through an IV and it sucks out different toxins, right? So they were like, well, these toxins are what's causing your kid's autism. We're going to roll them in a study and we're going to set up a fake board that says this is safe. Well, regulators found out they were doing this and the dad lost his license and the individual who now has been hired by Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to study autism by September, come up with a cause. Predictably, MMR is going to be on the list of things they think might might be a cause, even though it's been proven in dozens of studies not to be a cause, is that going to empower RFK Jr. to take that off of the covered services? It makes you wonder,
Rob,
stay tuned.
You're saying, I don't know
Yes, sir.
the name of this guy. The guy that Kennedy has leading his autism or his autism research is the guy who lost his license.
No, the guy who lost his license was his dad.
Okay.
His dad was a doctor. This guy's not a doctor. This guy got charged with practicing medicine without a license. Like, he and dad teamed up. Dad was a doctor. He was not.
Got it.
I forget. He had a bachelor's in something or another, So you almost can't make it up. I mean, the shit they do is just so baffling. It isn't baffling, right? It's intended to promote a narrative. And the narrative from RFK Jr. is that there is somehow a link between vaccines, specifically MMR, and autism. He's been selling this for 10 years since he was at the Children's Health Defense. And he's still trying to sell it. And he's now empowered. Now he's empowered to actually do something about it. So I guess stay tuned. Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, speaking of narratives, also in the news out of Kennedy's shop, the NIH researcher resigned. An NIH researcher resigned over being censored by Kennedy.
Yeah.
Dr. Kevin Hall resigned last week over censorship of research on ultra-processed foods, a study of PET scans of people drinking a milkshake looking to see if it caused reactions in dopamine similar to addictive drugs. So you had this guy, I was reading an interview with him. He was sort of excited by the MAHA movement's interest in food and how it affected the body, and he thought he could bring some real science to it. Just one note that milkshake study showed that it did not have the same effect.
Right.
But then he ended up having to resign because he believed that HHS was basically going to bury his findings because it didn't link up with the narrative that they were trying to push.
Yeah, I mean, I remember doing interviews before, when he was nominated, before the confirmation hearings, and I was brought as someone who was deeply concerned with this guy being head of HHS. And some of what they said was, well, you have some people in kind of public health world saying, well, the MAHA movement, they are interested in, the kind of nutritional causes of diseases and chronic diseases and promoting healthy behaviors. And my take was, well, yeah, we all do. Like every physician I know, my wife's a family doctor. We talk about it with our patients all the time, healthy eating, healthy living. I said, so that's going to require the government to fund a lot more in green spaces or alleviating food deserts so people can get healthy food, so people can have, better access to walking trails, in communities, particularly in urban centers. And I said, the problem is he brings with him all the baggage of the anti-vax, which far outweighs this. But now we're finding he's not really interested in discovering, this connection between certain kinds of nutrition and health. He's interested in having an opinion, shaping a narrative, and then requiring scientists to push, quote, research that fits the narrative. This Kevin Hall, he said basically, this is one study, right? People drinking milkshakes, you scan their brains, see what part is active. Happened to be a negative study. We see negative studies all the time. They're sometimes followed up by bigger studies that are positive. And then have another study that, this is just how research and science is done. It isn't like RFK thinks, where you do one thing, you decide what you want to find, you do one thing, it finds it, and now you can go, and that is truth. And so we have to take research, you go in. Well, I don't want to get too technical, but there's something called a null hypothesis. Every single time you do research, you assume that the thing you're looking for isn't true, and you are trying to disprove that. So the onus in a research study, all bets are off. You go in thinking this isn't going to be a thing. It's not happening. This is not causing a causative effect. And we got to prove that it is, right? Using statistics and all this. This study didn't. I give the guy credit. It worries me, good people leaving the NIH, good people leaving all aspects of HHS or the government in general, because who's left? But this guy's not going to peddle in their bullshit. He's not going to fit the narrative to whatever Kennedy wants. So, give him credit.
Rob, if Kennedy is making up,
I thought you were going to talk more about the null hypothesis. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm good. If Kennedy's making up experiments, would you call that a show trial?
A show, yeah.
No, okay.
Yeah.
Bad. That's terrible.
That was good.
Got it. Got
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, man.
All right. Okay. Last thing for tonight. RFK Jr.'s comments about autism. He really stepped in it with this one. We discussed this on the last episode. How, for those who haven't heard him, he basically went on and on about how I'm not going to read the full quote, but he would folks with autism would never hold a job, they'd never play baseball, they'd never write a poem, and on and on. You can see the full clip online, but man, the pushback on Kennedy's comments on this was sort of booming across the internet and on television. And at least in what I was reading, sort of seemed to come from even corners of the Maha movement, folks that thought Kennedy was with them, who had maybe been searching around for alternative theories about autism. Even they thought, wow, that went a little too far.
Yeah.
Anyway, what did you think, Rob, about the pushback that seems to continue around RFK's comments about autism?
Yeah, and by the way, April is Autism Acceptance Month, right? So this is the month we're in. So this is a guy basically painting with a broad brush that every single person on the autism spectrum. So that's the technical term, autism spectrum disorder. A spectrum tells us there are a whole range of individuals with this diagnosis. Now, his complete lack of understanding of that disease spectrum, but also his lack of understanding of how diseases are diagnosed in the first place. At the same time, right, that press conference he was at, that he was basically saying every single kid with autism is completely disabled. That's basically what he said. They are disabled. They're unable to function. He's also saying there's this explosion, right? An epidemic of autism, despite the fact that the CDC had put out there, and he was supposed to go talk about this, that largely the rise in autism in recent years has been just increased diagnosis, right? You have more people getting diagnosed, particularly with milder forms of the disease. These are folks who largely would be found to be on the autism spectrum. They just wouldn't have been diagnosed 20, 30, I'm dating myself, 40, 50 years ago when I was a kid. So he was refuting what his own CDC came out to show, and then at the same time insulting and like labeling all of these kids and families. I mean, he has been seen by many. I mean, the Maha movement was largely a group of individuals looking for answers for why their kid has this particular disease. And he came along with bullshit conspiracies and, quote, studies, right, that weren't real, to give them answers. And now he's coming along saying, I'm giving you answers and we're going to have something to do about it. But at the same time, I'm going to completely throw you all under the bus and make it sound like your kid is just a burden society. One of the biggest offenses of that kind of litany of that list that he read off, the first thing he said is they will never pay taxes. And it's like, that is your priority, dude? It tells you a lot about the kind of folks that are in this administration, namely him. Like the most offensive thing to him is that this is a group of people that won't pay taxes. By the way, they do pay taxes, right? Because many of them are very high functioning and work and live independently. So yeah, he is deserved of all of the backlash, all of the criticism. I haven't seen anything like a mea culpa or an apology come from him. I'm not sure that's allowed from Trump world. I don't know. Have you seen anything?
No, that's not allowed in Trump world. I don't think
that's not allowed.
That's how you get the boot.
Yeah. Right. If you admit fault or admit any kind of weakness, it's crazy that he holds those views. He feels comfortable espousing those views, and that we have someone like that in charge of our entire health system.
Yeah. All right. Well, Dr. Rob, I think that probably does it for today. Anything? Any last words?
No, just I guess the hope that I think is out there. The hope is that there are people, including people in his movement, pushing back against him, right? That's, I think, a silver lining, that people are not just accepting his bullshit without any degree of scrutiny. I think there's hope that physicians and patient advocates are out there pushing back in very targeted, strategic ways in districts with Republicans that are vulnerable. So I think there's a lot of bad stuff going on, and we don't want to pile onto that. I think we want to present what's real, what's going on, because it's scary, right? It's scary that Medicaid could get cut so significantly for billionaire tax cuts. But I think it's hopeful that these guys felt like they had to write a letter putting out there like, no, not me. I'm not supporting this stuff. You know, so I think the answer is you keep up the pressure. You know, you don't let it up because they haven't been forced. They already took one vote. All these guys already took a vote to kind of go down the path of cutting $880 billion. So let's remind ourselves of that. But they haven't taken that final vote in reconciliation that actually makes the cuts. And so the more pressure we keep putting on them, the more we keep reminding them that they are in service to their constituents, and these votes will damage their constituents and their entire communities. I think the more likely are to get wins when it comes to keeping healthcare for as many people as possible. And that's where we're at right now. That's the reality of 2025 is mitigating losses and getting as many wins as we can and keeping healthcare for as many people as possible. So yeah, we're in it. We'll keep bringing it to you all. And I hope people keep up the pressure.
That's right. And for those who are interested in taking action on Medicaid, the Committee to Protect Healthcare is hosting a action center where if you are a physician and you are listening to this episode, you can take a series of actions, contacting your congressperson, figuring out where events are in your area. We'll put that in the show notes. Please check it out. And with that, I think I'll read us out, Rob.
Sounds good.
Today's episode is written by Chris Savage, Dr. Rob Davidson, and me, Miles Baker. The episode was produced by Amelia Dillon Schneider, Aslan Ibrahim, and Joel Bryson. Music by Annette Somerset at Duneflower Productions. If you enjoyed today's show, please subscribe and leave us a rating on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen. Your support helps others discover the podcast. Physicians, your voice matters. You can please join the fight for better American healthcare by becoming a member of the Committee to Protect Healthcare, www.committeetoprotect.org. And as always, we'd love your feedback. Send your comments and suggestions to feedback@pagingamerica.org. Thank you for listening, and we will see you next time.